In America at the end of the 1970s, there began a very big move towards adult-orientated rock. Bands such as REO Speedwagon, Journey and Foreigner were dominating the airwaves, dominating the charts and dominating the live arenas. These were the new generation of hard rock heroes. The old favourites such as Led Zeppelin, Free and Bad Company were still around, but music was moving into a new era where American rock was starting to become far more pop rock orientated.
The beauty of AC/DC was that they never really fitted into anything particularly. They could actually appeal to punks, to metalheads, to hard rock fans, even to pop fans to some extent, because they transcended all those genres.
Iron Maiden, Def Leppard and Saxon were starting to get major attention on the UK rock circuit, whilst the old favourites were still very popular.
And because of Maiden, Saxon and Leppard, the likes of Judas Priest and Lizzy and AC/DC were picking up a new audience.
We honestly thought that the punk and the new wave thing might sort of spoil a bit for us, but it hasn't at all, you know. It was a big fad, it's just like anything else, a big fad for a while, and there's those that are still hanging on to it. But the main thing about it is that it gives rock music a real kick in the guts, you know.
They were a great live band fronted by one of the all-time masters of working an audience, and they quickly built a following in the UK, which augmented what had already happened locally in Australia for them in Melbourne.
Much of the band's success, particularly in their live persona, was due to their charismatic frontman and lyricist, Bon Scott.
You got to keep your eyes and ears open for lines and words and all, you know, and ideas and just pictures, you know. And kangaroos. Kangaroos, yeah, and you're right around.
Now, the great thing about Bon Scott was not only was he a charismatic frontman, a very talented lyricist, and a unique vocalist, he was a great guy. He loved nothing better than hanging out at a bar like the Music Machine and chatting to fans.
With new producer Mutt Lange on board, 1979 saw the band release their greatest album yet, Highway to Hell. With its more sophisticated sound, the record propelled AC/DC into the world-class rock arena.
Highway to Hell was an absolute landmark for AC/DC and for rock music generally. With Mutt Lange on board, they'd kind of turned the corner from being sort of snotty punk kids to actually creating some classic rock, but sort of imbibing it with the rock and roll elements that they all loved.
It's a terrific album. There's more concentration on how they were writing their songs. Definitely there's more sort of a slightly different approach to the way they're putting those songs together on record in the studio.
They were no longer just a pub or a club band, they were very much a theatre band in the UK, headlining band, and in America were starting to get severely and seriously noticed. They had stepped their game up and were ready.
Yeah. There's no need to change. I mean, we're what we are,
yeah,
and we ain't going to change for nobody. You know?
Yeah.
But the band were about to change. In February 1980, with the world seemingly at his feet, AC/DC frontman Bon Scott tragically died through a combination of heavy drinking and hypothermia.
Bon Scott's death just stopped them dead in their tracks. Here they were at the peak of their game, as more popular than they'd ever been, selling more records than they'd ever sold. They can see the rewards coming from all the really hard work they'd put in with Mutt Lange on Highway to Hell, and suddenly, bang.
The band members weren't even around, so they kind of, none of them knew exactly whether it was even true.
There's loads of rock singers that die before their time, but he's up there with Hendrix and Morrison and Joplin as someone who, you know, he walked it like he talked it. He was the real deal.
Well, you could say in theatrical terms his exit was perfect because, you know, he never had such a command of his audience that he had then, and it's like exit.
And what Malcolm said was that he'd just become used to Bond disappearing and not being around, and then suddenly turning up, and he depended on Bond turning up, and the thing that was most difficult to get used to was that he wasn't going to turn up anymore. And I just thought it was a really poignant way of putting it, and it's something that kind of stayed with me. And I think that sort of sums up, you know, these are not guys that are given to sort of great displays of affected emotion. They truly felt a loss.
For a while, the band were in meltdown. But it was to be Bond's mother, Isa Scott, who would provide the catalyst for AC/DC to continue, insisting that Bond would have wanted it that way.
It was actually Malcolm who rang Isa Scott, Bond's mother, and broke the news to her. That was kind of the stepping stone that they needed to be able to get back to work, because his mother said to him, Bond would want you to carry on.
With Angus and Malcolm working together in the studio, they would definitely have been working on ideas that would have formed the basis for Back in Black. Some of those ideas would have been floating around out of old sessions, perhaps from Highway to Hell. Some would have been new ideas that had been generated on the road. The way AC/DC worked, it really would have been Angus and Malcolm who would have built the song up to a certain point. They wouldn't have needed anyone else around them. So, I mean, a lot of groundwork would have been done for Back in Black in the weeks after Bond's death, possibly with some ideas that had been around when Bond was alive.
At first, the band toyed with the idea of Malcolm singing, but these plans were soon shelved. But no one at the time could have imagined AC/DC ending up with ex-Geordie frontman Brian Johnson.
Any successful band who've ever replaced a singer and moved on has done it with someone who's not like his predecessor. When Ozzy was fired by Black Sabbath, Sabbath didn't look for an Ozzy clone, they got Ronnie James Dio in for Heaven and Hell. When David Lee Roth quit Van Halen, they didn't look for another David Lee Roth, they got Sammy Hagar in.
When Brian Johnson was asked to audition for AC/DC, he was in fact working for British Leyland as a roof fitter.
A fan actually sent a tape in to the Lieber Krebs management of Brian Johnson. According to the band, it had been Bond's fault. Some years before, he'd actually toured in his old band Fraternity with Brian Johnson and Geordie.
Fraternity came to England to try their luck with the UK scene, and at that point Geordie, the glam rock band from Newcastle that Brian Johnson fronted, would have been at their peak, and the two of them ended up playing at least one show together.
So when Bond died, this same fan got back in touch with AC/DC and pointed out Bond's enthusiasm for Brian.
They probably didn't know what the hell they were going to do. So any idea, however odd it might seem now, maybe it was just oh, well, let's do it. I mean, if they'd have been thinking perhaps a little more level-headedly, they might have said, forget it, we're not going to do anything like, look, we're not going to listen to what a fan suggests.
Geordie in the early 70s were regarded as part of the glam rock scene. The scene that gave us Slade, Sweet, and perhaps more pertinently for Geordie, Mutt. They had a couple of hits, but unlike Slade and Sweet, they never really, or even Mutt, they never really had a career that continued on a certain level.
They had a huge hit with a song called All Because of You. They didn't really crack it, so the band kind of imploded. Brian figured he'd had his big chance at fame.
Because they had to wear huge trousers and big platform boots, and it just looked pretty ridiculous on the kind of guys from the northeast, really. They looked very uncomfortable with it.
Brian wasn't the only name thrown into the hat. I mean, obviously there was a lot of press speculation at the time. One of the names that was being bandied around in Australia was Steve Wright, who'd sung with the Easy Beats. With George Young and Harry Vander, but he was a drugs counsellor at the time, so it seems kind of unlikely that he would wanted to throw his hat back into sort of like the rock and roll ring and get involved in that rock and roll lifestyle again.
Gary Holton of the Heavy Metal Kids and Jimmy Barnes of Cold Chisel also appeared on the shortlist, but their performance style was so similar to Bond's that they would have been overshadowed by their predecessor.
A lad called Alan Fryer from an Aussie band called Fat Lip was reported to have been offered the job. In fact, it appeared in the press in Australia. The rumour has it that George Young actually offered him the gig.
What Harry Vander and George Young had done, they'd gone so far as to take 5 songs from the Highway to Hell album, wipe Bond's vocals from them, record them with Alan Fryer singing them, and they'd, in a roundabout way, sort of said, we think you're good enough to do the job, and he probably thought he was going to be the next lead singer of AC/DC.
When a friend got in touch with him and said, a mutual friend between AC/DC, and said, there's a band that would like you to audition. He said, look, I owe it to the guys to play the gig. They'll lose money if I'm, he had a club gig. They'll lose money. I can't do it, not certainly if I don't know who the band are. And the bloke said, well, I can't tell you the band's name, but I can tell you their initials. Down he came, and a typical affable Geordie, as immensely friendly chap, as friendly today, after all the millions he's earned with AC/DC as he was back when he joined the band and he didn't have a pot to piss in. Stardom hasn't changed him in any way. He's a really nice bloke. In fact, when he was supposed to be down for the audition, the band was sort of waiting for him, went looking and found him playing pool with the roadies.
Brian was the man, not just because of his voice, but because he fitted in so well with the rest of the band.
I think with the audition it probably settled him down a lot because they were very down to earth. He wasn't given a full list of expectations and a manner of behaving. They just accepted him as he was.
He got the best gig a singer could have, certainly at that time, and he knew he had a lot to live up to. And it's a kind of, I think it was about a 12-hour flight out to Nassau because you have to stop off in Bermuda on the way. And we played cards, and Brian is just one of the best comedians. I mean, it was just a continual stream of jokes. And we had a fantastic time. You might imagine that as we neared Nassau that Brian may be getting more and more nervous. In fact, as we neared Nassau, I think Brian was getting more and more relaxed in a number of ways.
It is the best opening track of any album ever. So such an ominous bell, and it says so much.
For many people, the opening song on Back in Black with its ominous tolling bell was a big surprise.
Now there's another song which I always relate to that, and it's Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, except there's a more mournful tone about Hell's Bells by AC/DC as compared to the ominous tone of the Black Sabbath bell. And most people believe that it has a certain connection with Bon Scott. I think they may be right in terms of spiritual connection. I don't think they set out as a band, AC/DC, to write a tribute song to their late singer, but somehow there's a connection.
They also started the album with a song that would not have suited Bon's singing style.
Be it because of Mutt Lange's production or just the band direction, they were making stadium rock in a sense, and that album really kicked that off for them.
But it's got one of those great openings, not just the bell, but the riff, which slowly comes in and never really drives forward. It maintains a certain stately stature, which actually makes it, if anything, even more remarkable.
Most fans of the band would not have known what Brian Johnson sounded like.
There was no internet to download any stuff off, so unless anyone had any old singles from 1973, or remembered, then all they had to go on was sort of what would have been reported in the press as to vaguely what he sounded like. Now I remember this vividly because I was at school and I'd just come over to this country from Australia, and huge AC/DC fan, and me and all my schoolmates just so eager to hear what this new guy sounded like. The morning that album was released, raced home on my bike, and I can remember putting that album on, putting the needle down and waiting, and they teased you for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, with the Hell's Bells riff, there's the note hanging underneath all the way through, almost like a drone. So you've got the first note down, and then the other notes carry on over that. But you've got to keep that low note hanging. If your hand touches the guitar and you cut it out, it loses all its effect. It's got to be played properly. Whereas when you're playing a chord riff, it's much easier to bash it out. But there's you've got a root note in there. You have to keep returning to the root note. But then when the riff kicks in, everyone's playing along, then a new riff kicks in. So they go into a second riff, which they don't always do. And in fact, they hardly ever do. Change the theme, So the new riff comes in, and it all settles down, and then the vocals come in. Beautiful.
Especially with the way Malcolm plays, he really does pull back sometimes, and it might just be minute what he does, but really if you listen to the whole song of the way it's played, for instance Hell's Bells, he really does sit back Malcolm's very disciplined in the way he plays. He's very tight, very pulled back and all that, and lets Angus take control.
It's not as though he comes in on a foot, like, oh, what the hell, and he's straight in. It's such a long, ominous, almost mystical feel to it as it builds.
Because first there's the bell. That in itself is like, you know, 1, wow, 2, okay, I understand, tribute to Bond, you know. And then Angus starts that slow, teasing sort of guitar build-up, and it keeps on going, and it builds, and the band come in, and it builds, but you still don't know what this guy sounds like. And it's like, please, God, let him be good, you know. And suddenly, bang, he's in, and you're like, thank fuck for that.
I'm a rolling thunder, pouring rain. I'm coming out like a hurricane. My lightning's flashing across the sky.
A lot of singers will be like, well, I really want to go in, you know, high as hard as I possibly can, and what he did was nicely build it and hit various notes along the way rather than blowing all the cookies with the first note.
One of the main problems with recording the bell was that the key that we wanted the bell to be, or the octave rather, that we wanted the bell to be in, would have necessitated a bell twice the size of the one that we actually had. We thought about using recordings of other bells, but it was generally considered that we really should have a specific recording of a bell because we could control that best of all. So towards the end of the period in Nassau, there were a couple of backing vocals that needed to be done, and I then flew back to England to record the bell, or to record a bell, because the bell that had been commissioned wasn't ready. So they arranged for us to record a bell in a church tower in Loughborough, near where the bell foundry was. So I pitched up with the what was then the Manor Mobile on the appointed morning to record this, and we set microphones up in the bell tower. And we very quickly found there was a huge problem. Bell towers also have birds living in them, and every time we hit the bell, the first sound you heard was the fluttering of 250 birds flying off into the Leicestershire skies. So we had to scrap that particular way of doing it. I then talked to the people at the bell foundry, and they reckoned that within the next 2 days they could get the actual bell ready for us. So we suspended the bell in the bell foundry. And I thought it would be really cool to have the guy who made the bell hit the bell. We then had to take this multitrack. We chose the best hit of the bell. We then did a mix of that using all of the microphone sources that we felt were best. And we then slowed that down to half speed, which naturally takes it down exactly 1 octave. And that was the recording that we used.
AC/DC were one of the first rock bands to employ the use of large props and gimmicks as part of their live shows, and the bell was to become one of their most enduring icons.
I think of all the songs on Back in Black, Hell's Bells is the one that AC/DC fans have readily identified with over the years. It's not to say that the others don't have their moment and don't have their place, but somehow there's a special relationship between Hell's Bells and the audience because it's slightly different. It was the opening song of the album, and again, I think that played an important part in making it part of AC/DC folklore. But there is somehow a connection with the past. There's somehow a connection and a deferential statement towards Bon Scott while moving forward.
It opened the shows, and that was fantastic in itself, because the lights dimmed and there was the tolling of the bell. This bell was descending from the gods, and then Brian Johnson runs on the stage and he's got a mallet with wires coming off it in one hand. And I remember vividly the first time I saw him with Brian, he just ran on stage, looked at the crowd and went like that, took his hat off, lobbed it into the audience, and then started hammering this bell.
The specially crafted bell cost the band £6,000 and now hangs over the doorway of Malcolm's English mansion.
Everybody knew that what song was coming, and they also knew by that point, virtually everyone that was watching the band live had the album and already knew the songs inside and out. And that, again, was a good way of kind of bringing the crowd into the Brian era already by beginning with that, and kind of place an emphasis on the fact that they weren't attempting to come out and just play their hits. They had a new album that they felt very proud of.
I mean, in a way, it kind of took the heat off Brian, perhaps made him feel less nervous, because it gave him something to do the minute he came on stage. And he would obviously be very nervous at that point, because it's like, my God, another set of fans who haven't seen me, sort of thing. Just talking about it, sending shivers down my spine. That's how good, Hell's Bells is. That's the kind of effect it actually had on you at that point. And it's still a brilliant way to open an album.
I think Shoot to Thrill has been unfairly overlooked across the years. It's a fabulous song, and after Hell's Bells you suddenly see AC/DC right putting their pedal to the metal. I think it's got a great groove and so forth. I don't understand why it's been overlooked over the years. I think part of the reason is it never really got a shot as a single and got lost with You Shook Me All Night Long especially.
If someone was to say, oh, can you give me a sample of AC/DC, that would be it. The first 2 minutes of that song. Brilliant, mate.
I'm gonna take it down, 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 down. So don't you fool around. I'm gonna pull the trigger, shoot the thrill, right again. Too many women, too many pills. I said, shoot the thrill, right again. Get my gun at the ready, fire at will, yeah.
Because you got Hell's Bells, ominous, dark, Hell's Bells, the bell ringing. Shoot the Thrill's Left Turn Clyde in the feel of the album.
It's also one of those things where they were building it up a lot. There's a lot of different things going on left and right. If you turn one speaker down, listen to the other, you can hear all sorts of different things going on. And it kind of proves that it's not as simple as it seems to be with that.
It's testament to the band that you don't notice the rhythm section. It just drives them on. Cliff Williams and Phil Rudd drive the band relentlessly onwards, on a song like Shoot to Thrill, because it's a pacier song.
The only overdubs recorded on the album were vocal patch-ups and small parts of the lead guitar.
And I had a completely different setup to record Angus's guitar. I set up amplifiers in 2 different rooms. And we used his radio system to broadcast the sound out to those different amplifiers. And his radio system gave an extra little kick to the sound. So it's interesting, on Shoot to Thrill, when we got to the mixing stage, we decided that we wanted to redo some of the solo on that. But we didn't have the radios with us. They'd already gone off to be packed up, ready to go out on tour. So we had to use a conventional cable, and we were in a different studio. So I still, to this day, when I listen to Shoot to Thrill, I can hear where the lead guitar sound changes.
Malcolm uses just basic open chords, whereas Angus might use a string or a half a chord or something like that. But because of what he plays, the humbucker, he needs to come back a bit, and that's where you've got that, the rhythm comes forward and the lead goes back, and that's sort of interchanging between the two that gives it that balance.
It's got that guitar, and the drums haven't even kicked in yet. You've got a groove coming out of the guitar. So we've got a rhythm instrument playing a drummer's part, and then the drummer comes in and all hell breaks loose.
Fired on always by brilliant rhythm guitar playing from Malcolm Young, over the top of which Angus will solo frenetically, very much in a bluesy kind of vein.
What Angus does, he starts off with a couple of notes and a chord, and you hear the rhythm that Malcolm plays, which is a G and a D with a little flick in there. That's just basic open chords, and it's just played really tight, lovely.
The riff starts out of key in a way. That's perhaps one of the secrets of it. When the singing comes in, again, like with Hell's Bells, there's a new riff. But with this riff, it doesn't come in before the vocals, it comes in with the vocals. And it's a riff that starts in another chord that's not the key, if you see what I mean. So it's waiting, it's kind of an anticipation thing. I find AC/DC is full of anticipation.
Vocally, it's very difficult. You know, there's a lot of breathing to be done in a very short space of time in that one. I don't know if Brian finds it difficult, but I fucking well do it. It really takes it out of you, that song, because you're swooping and diving all over the shop. You just do not stop. It's an incessant song. I think it's one of those things where Brian probably looked back and he probably would have thought, I wish I hadn't done that line like that because it's a real bitch to do live. Shoot Her Through is one even, you know, he had trouble with on the 1981 and 82 tours. So, you know.
Brian Johnson's vocals are so perfect for what they did. I can't imagine Bon Scott singing that song.
The lyrics are very, very much from the Bon school. Now, I'm not saying that Bon wrote them. What I'm saying is that, you know, this is what AC/DC do best. They always have done best. It's, you know, this is why, you know, girls like them, but they're very much a bloke band.
Bond songs are somewhat more cheeky to sing because they are almost autobiographical in their lyrical content. I find I have to phrase words with meaning. When I'm singing it, I have to mean it a bit more. Whereas with Brian, I have to, you got to hit harder. Songs like Shoot the Thrill, very difficult song to sing.
The line in Too Many Women, Too Many Pills, which most people regard as being an allusion to AC/DC and Life on the Road, and quite understandably, they covered that sort of thing before on many, many occasions, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Brian himself subsequently claimed it was more a statement on the fact that we were living in a society that was too dependent on pills, and that women especially were stacking up on pills to try and make their lives better. I'm not convinced that statement is actually true. I suspect it became a subsequent analogy he put forward in order to diffuse a certain controversy.
It's kind of not really what we would see from Brian in the future, or, you know, even during that album. The songs that were obviously his don't tally with that, and it would seem quite a strange thing to bring to the table for a new singer. I think really, had those words not already existed, Angus and Malcolm might well have said, no, I don't think we should go there.
After Power Age failed to take off in the US as hoped, it was Atlantic Records who insisted on a change of producer for their next album, Highway to Hell.
Yeah, I think Atlantic Records in New York felt that they had something with AC/DC, but it wasn't quite right for their market. AC/DC, it's interesting to know that AC/DC, when they left Australia, they decided to come to England first, not to try and crack the American market. And I think that's because they were aware that their sort of abrasive, very energetic sort of style of rock and roll would suit much more to UK ears.
Up until this point, AC/DC had always been produced by Angus and Malcolm's older brother, George Young.
They pretty much dictate what happens in AC/DC. They always have done, they always will do. And everyone else is kind of on the periphery of that. Even if they're great mates, that's the core of AC/DC.
There was a little bit of irritation opening up between Bon on the one hand and the young brothers Angus and Malcolm on the other. Bon felt a little bit like there was a Young clan. Angus and Malcolm and George Young, the co-producer, that the Young family controlled the band, who didn't really accept or acknowledge the input that the rest of the band could give.
To have been told that their older brother and his best friend are no longer required to produce wouldn't have gone down very well. Now, rumour has it that George took the news incredibly well, but behind the scenes was furious. But what you also should note is that AC/DC themselves acknowledged that, yes, the suggestion that they should get someone outside in to play around with their sound slightly was required, because they obviously, you know, saw it was a perfectly reasonable argument by Atlantic.
The introduction of Mutt Lange as a producer for Highway to Hell, I feel, was backed heavily by Bon more than any other member of the band. Not only because of what Mutt Lange could bring to the table as a producer, but because he wasn't George Young.
He specifically wanted to conjure up the type of sound that Free and those sort of rock bands had. And because of my pedigree working at Island Studios and having worked with some of those artists, Adam thought I was a good person to introduce to Mutt. We met at Roundhouse Studios during the recording of Highway to Hell. And the economics of them making Highway to Hell enabled them to employ somebody externally to either record or mix the album, and they decided that the mix end of it was the more important. That's the process that happens after the recording, when you then position the music in the stereo image and you make the final layoff that becomes the album. So I went down to Roundhouse Studios and met up with everybody and was hired to do that mix of Highway to Hell.
Now here we are in 2006, and Mutt Lange has a reputation for spending months, years sometimes, on any album. And Mutt Lange has a reputation for having a huge input, a disproportionate input, into the record when you compare him to most producers.
AC/DC at that point recorded very much as a garage rock band. The band would often record as a live unit. Mutt Lange stopped all that.
In those days, there was very little technological equipment beyond the recording console, a pair of speakers, and a microphone and a tape machine to record on. A lot of the high-tech equipment that is available now just didn't exist at all. So recording well in those days was all about the expertise, about knowing the equipment that you had to work with.
I think what happened was that he said, I want to make you more accessible, but without taking away what makes AC/DC, because, you know, with a lot of bands, they take away what makes them successful, and that's the problem. It's not because it's commercial or anything, it's just the fact is they've taken away the real guts of what AC/DC are about. So that's what Mutt Lange did. He gave them a little spit shine. He gave the songs good structure, clarity in the guitars, clarity with the backing vocals. Everything on Highway to Hell sounded really good.
Mutt Lange knew what AC/DC were capable of, and I think he knew how far he could take that sound without taking the rawness away, without taking their character away from it, but how far he could take it, what he could do with it.
They were using these 50-watt combos, Marshall little combos, little amps, and great sounding amps. You know, there's not a lot of bottom end coming out of them. But then with Mutt Lange, you can hear that they've brought in these quad boxes, the big closed cabs. And Mutt Lange, what he did was he separated a lot of the signals. It's all separated, everything is perfect.
He takes the song for what it is, he takes it apart, and then he puts it back together. And then he'll say, but we can take it apart and we can do it this way. He shows many different ways of being able to do the same song.
Later in Mutt's career, Def Leppard would give an insight into the producer's painstaking recording process, where every note on every song was recorded separately.
And if it takes months or years to do it properly, he'll do it to his satisfaction. But when DC started to work with him on first Highway to Hell, then Back in Black, he hadn't reached that level. So they got him at almost the perfect time for Mutt Lange, the producer.
I mean, Bon was taught breathing exercises by Mutt Lange, so he learned to sort of develop his singing style instead of just going in and belting out live, which is what he had done. I mean, he was learning all these new processes. And, you know, I mean, everyone always says with AC/DC and Mutt Lange, it was just zeitgeist. It was right time, it was right place.
He didn't so much change AC/DC as slightly refined certain key elements so that the guitars maybe weren't slightly as harsh, so that the arrangements were not always in your face but had a certain balance.
And so it was that AC/DC found themselves back in the studio again with Mutt Lange for the recording of Back in Black.
Given that, as well as the fact they had the material, Mutt's input was just kind of, let's get it down, let's get it done. And the band were that good by then that musically they could lay the tracks down almost in one.
The reason why it was done quickly, 2 months is what it took to record, was because anything longer and the momentum would have been lost. And I think that's part of the problem with For Those About to Rock, which came later, is they had too long to produce it. And a lot of that live feel and momentum came out of the mix.
He knew that with them he couldn't turn them into Def Leppard. They weren't going to sort of soften up too much for radio. But what he did do with Back in Black was he changed the sound to fit Brian. It was a bit ahead of its time in terms of sound quality, and much like his other work, he'd kind of brought them a few years in front already, which is one reason why it lasts so well. It still sounds good now because he did a good job sort of 30 years ago.
With Money Honey, I think you'd see the fundamental difference between Bon Scott and Brian Johnson. Bon's lyrics, clever, based on foreplay to some extent as much as the actual sexual congress itself. Brian goes straight to the point, absolutely no messing about.
You know, they weren't. They obviously AC/DC were no strangers to women of the oldest profession, and Bon used to relish in detailing his exploits with ladies of the night, and it was just something that again it carried on. It carried on that tradition of what Bon did, and they did it. Was still doing it very well.
It's interesting because you can always sort of compare, I think, AC/DC songs from one album to another. Money Honey is always the beating around the bush, beating around the bush on Highway to Hell. Money Honey on Back in Black.
It's the kind of thing he was thinking of in the Bahamas. He was eyeing up American women, and I think he probably got his fill when he could. And a song that's kind of referencing prostitution was, I think, more in line with his kind of mentality and the sorts of things he would sing about in future.
And there are a couple of occasions on Back in Black where they go straight for the jugular as far as their lyrical wordplay, instead of beating around the bush, as it were, and then hitting what they did. And it's a perfect example of the kind of the lowbrow is how critics would have termed it, but it's like affable blokishness.
Brian double-tracked his vocal, and that's to say that what they do is Brian would have gone into the studio and he'd have laid down on the chorus, he would have laid down him singing it once. Then Mutt Lange and Tony Platt would have set up another vocal channel and he would have sung exactly the same thing again in those days, and then they would have raised them up together to give a bigger vocal.
The way that comes in, you can't replicate that power. It's only 4 chords. What is it that makes that so powerful? When they steam into that little AC/DC classic riff that they do, it's only simple chords, but it's the way they play it over that bass and drums which is guaranteed to get you going.
Every song on that album, and this is true with What Do You Do for Money Honey, it's got a swing. Phil Rudd, what a fantastic drummer. I mean, you could set a watch to that man.
Almost every song on Back in Black is about sex. That's the way they were. That's the way AC/DC almost have been all the way down the years. That's the way they write. But I think this album, more than any other, the lyrics tend to stick out because they're so much more obvious than was the case with Bon Scott's era. Bon Scott may have written about a prostitute, but wouldn't have done it in that way. Bon Scott's the man who wrote about the clap in a card game scenario. Brian Johnson writes about prostitutes, and pretty much you can see, standing on the street corner, you can actually see it in your mind.
Probably another song that people might suggest there was perhaps some input from, work they might have done with Bon. But, all the credits are young Johnson. And Brian Johnson has proved, since that he's more than adept at matching Bon for double entendre and for schoolboy smut and ribaldry.
Giving a Dog a Bone, again, is a great song in terms of the riff and the rhythm and so forth. And you hear the chorus in your mind with almost the group shout, giving a dog a bone, giving a dog a bone. You actually hear that in your head. Again, I think it comes down to the way Brian Johnson approached lyrics. The title itself leaves nothing at all open for doubt. What he's talking about basically is readily available girls, groupies, I think, more than anything else. And that's where Brian Johnson honed down his style in terms of, well, if I'm going to write about groupies, I'm going to call them dogs, and I'm going to talk about boning dogs or giving the dog a bone.
A lovely story about giving a dog a bone was that Brian was supposed to have written that song because he liked canines and cats, and he was very big into animals. That's what his mum told everybody anyway. Giving a dog a bone. It's a great lyric. She takes you down easy, going down to her knees, going down to the devil, down at 90 degrees. Now, what are we on about, guys?
They're on a roll here, aren't they? You know, I mean, if Hell's Bells itself was about the storm that they were confronted with whilst recording the album, they've quickly forgotten that, and they're in their stride. Shoot to Thrill, What Do You Do for Money, Honey, Giving the Dog a Bone. Giving the Dog a Bone, another sort of real jackhammer rock and roll song. You know, it's sort of them at full pelt.
It's possibly slightly cleverer than some of the lyrics he came up with, but again, it's very straightforward, very obvious, and I think in his way he was actually looking forward to getting out on the road. Hey, this is what we can do. And also I think there was actually an input from the rest of the band here, especially from the Youngs, because that's the way they perceived and treated groupies. They're there to be, you know, it's a two-way street. They want to shag us, we want to shag them, we'll move on, they'll move on, who cares? You're just giving a dog a bone.
Like What Do You Do for Money, Honey? I mean, the lyrics leave nothing to the imagination. It's like, I'm giving the dog a bone. You know, and that might be an illusion, but we certainly know what it's alluding to. You're left in absolutely no doubt. You know, it's another song about fucking, which is what AC/DC obviously enjoyed doing and what they do best.
There has always been a lot of controversy over who exactly wrote what on Back in Black. Certainly in Brian's Geordie days, he was not responsible for many of the lyrics.
These lyrics, whether they've come from Brian, Malcolm, Angus or Mutt Lange, they've come from somewhere, and they've got they roll well in this song. She's using her head again, and then you've got a nice call and response with the backing vocals later in the song. She's using her head again, using her head again. Very gospel type thing, that call and response thing.
The backing vocal context on AC/DC is really to just encourage people to sing along. Giving the Dog a Bone is a classic one of that, because it is very much a sing-along song. And it's just everybody around the microphone just belting it out.
Interestingly enough, I think musically it's probably the most no messing, straight to the point riff they had on the album. They do go straight in there, no messing around at all. Let's just get into the act and get out again and move on.
Compass Point Studios is located on the island of Nassau in the Bahamas. Very much cut off from the rest of the world, this idyllic location offers artists a uniquely relaxing environment to work from.
The choice of Compass Point Studios was the result of a whole basket of different reasons. I think most importantly it was an opportunity for us all to go off and make the album somewhere together and out of the gaze, as it were.
According to Angus, the reason the band went to Compass Point in the Bahamas to record was a mixture of tax reasons and available studios. Obviously there were studios all around the world, but it kind of seemed to marry the two together well, that they could get out the country and forfeit the tax kind of situation and just get on with it in a fairly low-key environment where there wasn't any outside kind of pressure or interest, because people in the Bahamas weren't interested in AC/DC.
It's a one-story one-stroke, two-story building that is just the other side of the road from the beach as you head out of Nassau town. It's thankfully about 2.5 to 3 minutes walk from an extremely nice pub called the Traveller's Rest that does fantastic food and great beer and amazing banana daiquiris.
It was owned by Chris Blackwell of Island Records fame. It was cut off in a way from being in an urban location where the band come into the studio, record and then go home or go back to their apartment. Because there's not a huge amount to do on that island. Yes, there's a pub, yes, there's various other activities, but because you almost are locked into this situation where you're living the album 24 hours a day, I believe Mutt Lange felt it was the right thing for the band to do, to get away from all the pressure of constantly being badgered by the media or badgered by the fans, and to get into an environment where the only thing that mattered was the music.
Some of the accommodation was actually in the same building as the studio, and then there are several houses that that the studio has access to that are in the immediate vicinity. And the band was staying in one of those houses. I was staying in a flat above the studio, living over the shop, as it were. And Mutt was staying in a house somewhere else.
At the time, Nassau had been going through some political unrest, and there had been a number of tourists mugged and even murdered on the island.
But when they did arrive, the locals gave them 6-foot spears to guard themselves with, which they thought was a joke at first, but they soon found out it was entirely serious. And the place where they were, the lady that looked after the place there, came round with a machete and said, if anyone sticks their head through the door that you don't know, chop their head off.
In some respects, the only difficult thing about recording somewhere like Nassau is to get people to come in to the room with no windows. You know, out of the blue sky and the sunshine and the pleasant sea breezes. But there again, there's only so much sunbathing you can do. So, and of course, Brian never took his hat off. So,
It's a strange place, to say the least. But then, if you speak to AC/DC about the process, they'll tell you they were working so hard they didn't really pay much attention to what's been speculated was going on around them while they were recording, and certainly didn't have enough time to enjoy, you know, what would seem to be very relaxing surroundings.
And they were pretty well consistently on the road all the way through the albums prior to Highway to Hell, all through Highway to Hell, and then into Back in Black. So for them to have a period of time, I guess, you know, somewhere nice, it was a way of combining the two things. And it was obvious that the schedule, as soon as that album was made, was going to be fairly tough too.
This hard-working ethic meant they were able to finish recording the album in what seems like an amazing 6 weeks.
AC/DC have never been one of those bands that spend a long time in the studio. We aren't talking 7 years like Def Leppard. You know, and 6 weeks in the recording studio with Mutt Lange is a lifetime to AC/DC.
Having a target to making an album is a very good thing because it focuses the mind. And making a rock album over too long a period of time, I think, could be counterproductive. This particular Back in Black was an album that needed to be made. It needed a focus of attention. It needed to be made in a defined period of time.
It's a testament to the quality of musicianship and songwriting that they could go into a studio and knock an album out very quickly that would be of the quality of Let There Be Rock or Power Age, for example. And when forced to dissect their music in the way Mutt Lange would have forced them to dissect their music, they still, I mean, they would have probably hit a sort of a happy medium with him.
They had a new singer in, it was a new start for the band, a fresh opportunity. And I'm convinced the reason why, and I'm sure it was Mutt Lange who suggested Compass Point, I'm sure he suggested it because he felt it would create an unreality bubble so that they wouldn't have to deal with the reality still of coming to terms with Bond's death. They could concentrate fully and solely on making the best album possible.
Let Me Put My Love Into You, Babe, is interesting because, I mean, we are talking, obviously, Way Back in Black was recorded, we're talking about vinyl. So we're talking about two sides, and this ends side one. So they've built up side one on a musical level with Hell's Bells, then they are full pelt rocking out with Shoot to Thrill, What Do You Do for Money, Honey, Giving the Dog a Bone. And then they drop it down a touch because it's the end of the side.
Let Me Put My Love Into You, I've always felt was actually connected perhaps with the way Brian Johnson grew up in terms of the fact, let me put my love into you, babe, let me lay my love on the line, which was almost the age-old teenage thing that Meat Loaf tackled a little bit as well at some point about telling a girl anything she wants to hear if you can get laid.
It's nice and laid back, but it still rocks. You know, there are some bands that think you have to go 200 miles an hour to rock, and this proves there's power within holding it back a little. That's a good song for putting on if you've got a new woman, because she thinks it's a nice bluesy little number, but by the end you're really rooting her from behind.
There's absolutely no question what the song's about. It's a bloke asking a woman if he can fuck her. But done in actually quite a nice way this time, not quite as bold and brass as Giving the Dog a Bone. Let me put my love into you, babe. Perhaps the nicest question AC/DC ever posed.
Let me put my love into you, babe. Let me put my love on the line. Let me put my love into you, babe. Let me concentrate with my name.
It's kind of their concession to commercialism, really. It's kind of very radio sounding. Not that it ever got on the radio, but it was more their softer side coming out.
I think that became a single as a result of the success of the album. Picking singles is always a very difficult thing for a rock band. The important thing from the perspective of Back in Black was that it got the band onto American rock radio, and American rock radio at that particular point in time was really starting to take off. When you're producing any recording, in any case, and you know, this is another one of Mutt's fortes, is spotting the songs that should be contextualised so that they can be radio friendly, so they can actually be used as a single. And in those days, of course, because it's in the days of vinyl, it also required you thinking about how can that be edited down to 3.5 minutes long, because that's basically all that people would play.
You can look into all reasons why a song's commercial, and often it's deliberately commercial, where the writers or the producer have layered the harmonies on the chorus, or often it's just the way it's been written. Let Me Put My Love Into You, Babe is a commercial song. It's the way the chorus starts on a new chord, a new key. Well, we're in the same key, but it goes to a new chord, which gives it a little lift. And the backing vocals, which is another Mutt Lange touch, with Brian Johnson singing underneath himself.
The chorus has been double tracked. Brian taking 2 takes of the same vocal performance. Let me put my love into you, baby. It's almost Satchmo. It's down there within Satchmo, and what Mutt Lange has done is layer the backing vocals around it, almost like feathering a nest. So you've got Brian in here, and he feathers the backing vocals around it.
Quite frankly, if you're going to go and make a record just so that 3 people in Scunthorpe can listen to it, you shouldn't be making records. If you're going to make a record, you make a record for the widest possible audience to listen to it. And the widest possible audience for rock music at that particular time was America.
Let Me Put My Love Into You gave Angus an ideal opportunity to showcase his skills as a genius blues guitarist.
Angus is a very, very good blues guitar player. It's often overlooked with AC/DC's work. Let Me Put My Love Into You, it just gives them a chance to sort of display something slightly else, something extra from the full force rocking machine that they are.
It was released as a single later on in the life of Back in Black and wasn't a huge success, but I think it may be the sole song on Back in Black that gives an understanding of Brian Johnson's psyche, not just about Brian Johnson's need to have a quick shag. I think this may actually be Brian's plea to AC/DC fans saying, I have to be my own man. It's not my fault Bon Scott died. I have this opportunity. You have this opportunity. Let's move forward together. I think part of the reason why Back in Black works so well is the way that tracks are ordered. Had it started with Back in Black, I don't think the impact would have been as immediate as Hell's Bells. There's something about the structure and the way the songs are actually put onto, certainly the vinyl, that work so magnificently. And I think a lot of time and effort went into where the songs were going to go in the album. It wasn't a case of, let's record the 9, throw them up in the air, wherever they may fall, that's what we're going to do with them.
One of Mutt Lange's trademarks is to only work on the final tracks intended for an album. This is why there are no spare or partially finished songs for Back in Black. They recorded 10, and that was it.
Which is why, you know, when we've had like the Bonfire box sets come out with a remastered version of Back in Black, or Back in Black's been reissued along with the rest of their back catalogue, you don't find extra tracks or things like that, because most of the hard work will have been on the music that's on the record.
The track order didn't relate in any way to the order in which we recorded it. The order in which we recorded it was more about what everybody felt that particular day. The last track on the last side was recorded last song because it hadn't been formulated, or it hadn't been written basically before we got there.
Back then, we were talking about 2 sides of vinyl. These days, you're talking about 70 minutes of CD, which is why albums tend to have a lot of filler on them. But you know, you look at Back in Black, and it's 10 absolutely scorching hot rock tracks.
Inevitably, with Mutt, you'd put it together in one order and then take it apart and put it together in another order. And of course, other things came to bear on it because this was recorded in the days of vinyl, and so one had to make sure that the sides were balanced up in terms of length, and you couldn't put more than 25 minutes on one side and 10 minutes on the other side. So, and plus the fact that there were always 10 songs on an AC/DC album, so there were going to be 5 songs on one side and 5 songs on the other.
They kind of knew most of the order of the tracks, where they wanted to put the kind of big numbers that they'd got in mind, certainly at the start of each side and at the end of each side. There's kind of certain tracks, probably 4 of them, that were interchangeable, and perhaps they weren't sort of thinking too detailed about where they were going. I think the likes of What Do You Do for Money Honey, Shake a Leg, that kind of thing, that could have gone almost anywhere.
It was obvious that Hell's Bells was going to be the first track on side 1, which inevitably meant that side 2 would start with Back in Black.
There were certain things that lifted themselves into their position, and then we just tried things in different places, because you can think that song will work great against another song, and then you put it in there and it just doesn't work right.
You know, it dips at the right point, it lifts you back up at the right point, it hits another absolute peak, but doesn't leave you on that peak, it then just drops you down and leaves you wanting just that little bit more. Back in Black the song and Back in Black the track, that's the tribute to Bomb. That's what it was, you know, that's what it was meant for. It comes housed in the black sleeve. You know, they're in mourning, even though they've carried on. They are in mourning for their lost singer. They do have a new singer who's belting his guts out, in itself a tribute to Bomb, because, you know, this guy knows the shoes that he's got to fill and he's giving his all.
We are still in mourning for our fallen comrade, if you want. It's only been a couple of months since he died, so don't think for a minute we're not sad at his loss. So there may be a certain element of that. Please accept the fact we are moving forward, and therefore this song is called Back in Black, as indeed is the album, in order to represent the way we really feel deep down. But I think it's also a song of hope. It's a song about AC/DC saying, we really feel we're on the verge of something special. You know, it's not just a case of losing a singer and replacing him.
There are moments on the album when Brian Johnson firmly establishes himself very much as the new frontman, and Back in Black is certainly one of them.
He never came across as trying to copy Bon, of trying to be a new Bon. He just was, Bon was great and I'm me.
Breeze, the song Breeze, if you want to call it. But it's a very unusual song in the sense that the way it's played. It's sort of like the turnaround on a blues song, you know, that you come to the end of the 12 bars, you turn around and you start again, you know. It's just that, it's like that little bit there.
With AC/DC, I always used to think I could play the riffs, and then when you get into it, they're not as easy as you think. And the simplest things are the hardest. And Back in Black, I find it now fairly comfortable to play. I don't need to look at the guitar for the little fiddly bit, but I do often miss a note there. Although Angus does too now and again.
Yeah, the riff for Back in Black had been around a while from the Highway to Hell tour, and Malcolm had come up with it and had been playing it and kept saying to Angus, "What do you think of this?" And he was like, "Yeah, that's shit. You know, if you don't want it, I'll have it, and I'll say I wrote it." And so it was something, when something like that kicks around for a long time, and they keep playing it and it keeps being refined, but they know they've got something with that general structure. They knew it was going to metamorphose into something pretty big.
It's the space between the chords as well. I've always said that AC/DC are about anticipation. You're waiting for the moment where the rocket goes off, and you're waiting for the bass and drums to come in, or whatever the impact of the song is. There's always a moment.
With Back in Black playing it, after the lead break, then Malcolm will probably have a little bit more gain on the guitar. There's a little riff that he's got to do in there where he follows Angus, and playing it on a standard Gretsch setup wouldn't sound too good. You know, it would sound too twangy.
One more thing about Back in Black is they decided to put a new riff in near the end, which is one of their great riffs, one of their quite fast, challenging riffs. Two guitars, the drums and the bass drop out, classic AC/DC. Two guitars on the riff, drums and bass kick in again, and then the backing vocals on back. It really is a great moment.
Back in Black, unlike a lot of AC/DC songs, got a lot of gaps in it. Dum, da-da-dum. Those gaps make it a lot easier to put lyrics into place.
It was one of the songs that did get a lot of lyrical contribution in the studio, and we all contributed. Doing double time on the seduction line was one of my ones. So I'll always claim that.
It's almost like a rap. I think, in fact, probably there's a couple of rap artists that have used Back in Black lyrics in songs. Back in Black, I hit the sack. I'll be too long, I'm glad to be back. You know, that kind of thing. They wanted to write Back in Black, obviously about Bon, but not so people would really, you know, with his name in it, and we think Bonnie's lovely, we think Bonnie's great within the song. Some of the lines are a bit of a giveaway. Number one with the bullet on my power pack.
The line "Forget the hearse 'cause I'll never die, I've got 9 lives, cat's eyes" was certainly a Bon lyric, I think. It was kind of how he was feeling before his death, was the fact that he was untouchable and couldn't die, and made it all the more ironic.
Back in Black, I hit the sack. I've been too long, I'm glad to be back. It almost suggests of an afterlife. It's almost spiritual without being religious. And I think you've got to point that out, because AC/DC aren't the type to be political, religious or anything. I think, you know, Back in Black, it's been too long, I'm glad to be back. Let loose from the noose that kept me hanging around about. It's almost saying, I nearly died, my spirit lives on, in whichever way you want to look at that. That's what's good about these lyrics. They don't actually paint the whole picture. You got to think what they mean to you.
We are still in mourning for our fallen comrade, if you want. It's only been a couple of months since he died, so don't think for a minute we're not sad at his loss. So there may be a certain element of that. Please accept the fact we are moving forward, and therefore this song is called Back in Black, as indeed is the album, in order to represent the way we really feel deep down. But I think it's also a song of hope. It's a song about AC/DC saying, we really feel we're on the verge of something special. You know, it's not just a case of losing a singer and replacing him.
It is the centre point of the album. It's still a major part of the live show. It's still one of the greatest songs that the band probably ever recorded. Perhaps at the time overshadowed by Hell's Bells, because it had the bell and it opened the album, and it was. But Back in Black is the one that, you know, really stands out 26 years down the line as being the centrepiece of the album, as it should be. It's the title track. It's all about Bon Scott, about, you know, saying goodbye, about paying homage to this great rock and roll singer who's sadly no longer with them, and about moving on.
The psychic rapport between them is obviously because they're brothers first of all, but there's something there. Nobody can play those two riffs as tight as those two. However hard you try, there's something about the way they play which is, it is like a psychic link.
They're very adept at getting a selection of tunes that would fit together. Mutt was obviously having some input on that and guiding that, but Mutt's a very perceptive producer. His role with AC/DC was very much as a guiding hand, because these weren't people you could order about. You know, they proper adult musicians that had a very clear idea in their mind of where they wanted to be with their next album.
If you stripped down the Angus Brothers' guitar playing and took it back to the 50s, you would end up with a sound very reminiscent of Chuck Berry.
Take the distortion down a bit, take the volume down a little bit, perhaps sing it with a little less gravel, and you could almost every time come down and it will become a 50s rock and roll number. Well, from what I know about the Gretsch, firstly it's a much bigger guitar, heavier, it's a rhythm guitar. Malcolm uses quite heavy strings on it to give it more volume and more punch and more output, whereas the Gibson SG that Angus uses is a light, well, one of the lightest electric guitars you can get. It's a guitar that can sing, light gauge strings of course, you know, the thinnest you can get I think, almost, 9s. You can stroke the guitar and you can make it wail and sing, which are perfect for lead guitar, perfect for what Angus does.
Malcolm plays a large Gretsch, which produces a very different sound to Malcolm's tiny Gibson.
If you have two guitars in a band and you have them both coming out as separate channels, you get like a wall of guitars. If you pan the stereo on Highway to Hell and Back in Black, if you pan to the left, you'll hear just Malcolm coming out. If you pan to the right, you can hear just Angus coming out. And the lead breaks usually just come straight out the middle.
Well, I think Malcolm's had his Gretsch since 1963. He must have changed the pickup a few times, but he's got his own sound and he's always used a certain amp.
If you listen to Back in Black, for instance, for the guitar sounds, Malcolm uses a Gretsch, and a Gretsch has a Filtertron pickup. I mean, it's been around since the 50s. You can only get it from one place. It's on the verge of becoming a single coil like a Telecaster, whereas Angus uses a SG, which has got a humbucker in it. And a humbucker is two pickups put together. And the reason why it's called a humbucker is because of the two magnets, it cancels the hum that you get from single coils.
In my main guitar, I use an Angus Young signature pick, which is a slightly modified version of the same. It's got more top end on it, more treble, more bite. Slightly different sound, nice sound. But the tightness of Malcolm's rhythm and Angus's loose playing work really well together. So if Malcolm's got a riff going, he'll keep it nice and tight, locked in. Angus hits the chords over the top.
Malcolm uses a very high gauge of strings on his guitars. These thick strings can only be used for rhythm guitar work and are an important part of the AC/DC sound.
If you get two guitars, one with a standard set and one with a heavy set, and you strum one and strum the other, you'll notice there's a big difference between the two. But the difference with a heavy gauge string, you can't do some of the stuff that you can do on a standard set of strings, you know, like playing lead or stuff like that. But if you want to get some chords, or if you're just playing rhythm like Malcolm does, perfect. You get the lovely sound. You can get the definition of one guitar and you get the filth of another guitar.
When Back in Black came out, there were a couple of moments on the album that I felt were new styles of playing. Like Angus started the picking, the three-finger picking on Shoot to Thrill. Angus carried on. Virtually every album after that featured that style of picking. I mean, for those about to rock, the intro to that was another example. He'd found something else that he liked to do, and it worked really well. The sound of the two guitars worked so well together. There's a musical knowledge between the two that is, it's quite simple what they're doing, but it's psychic.
You Shook Me All Night Long was the single from Back in Black. Its chart success gave AC/DC a brand new audience of pop fans, both in the UK, but especially in America.
You know, AC/DC have a knack of being able to pen brilliant hit singles. You Shook Me All Night Long is just a great, catchy, you know, it's one of the all-time great metal singles.
AC/DC's audience grew exponentially with Back in Black. It went from the hardcore, very big hardcore, die-hard hard rock fans into an audience that embraced everybody.
Partly due to that song, I think. I'm sure that they've sold 10 million of the 40 million albums because of that song.
And I feel that You Shook Me All Night Long certainly gave it a kickstart. But it wouldn't have happened had the album not been as strong as it were.
Lyrically, it's disgusting for the top 40. But, you know, that'll put a smile on any fan, the face of any AC/DC fan. You know, it's great. AC/DC sing about, it's another song about shagging, you know, talking about shagging those women, you know, American women are noted for having hefty thighs.
Brian had never been to America. Knocking me out with those American thighs. What thesaurus did he borrow that from? It's an incredible song. He'd never been to America. How did he know about American thighs? He'd never really written songs greatly about women, but that was one song where he just went and thought, right. He always said, there's a classic line, he said he'd never been to America, but he'd seen the women, and he said everything pointed north on them. So I think it's great. So he wrote this song about women he'd never met and a country he'd never been to. I think it's fantastic.
She told me to come when I was already there, which I'm still, you know, was a Bon Scott line, but it's nicely worked into the whole fabric. And the song itself is a joy. It's joyous, it's uplifting, it's upbeat. It's got that sexual overtone, of course, but it's not smutty, it's just a little naughty.
The song was a hit all over Europe, charted in the UK, and more importantly for AC/DC, went into the US top 40, their first ever single to do so.
So they knew exactly how they wanted to sound when they went in to record Back in Black, where they probably hadn't when they went in to record Highway to Hell, but they knew exactly what they wanted.
They also knew that they needed to write a hit if they were ever going to get their music played on commercial US radio stations, where in the early 80s, rock was still considered a niche.
The recording of You Shook Me All Night Long, that was the one moment where we started off down the wrong paths. Malcolm and Angus weren't around when we started putting the vocal down, and we got some of the chorus happening, and Mutt had got Brian singing the emphasis the other way round. Instead of you shook me all night, it was you shook me all. It went a different way. The emphasis was slightly different. Malcolm came in and said, no, it wasn't supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be like this. So we had to go back and do that again. And, you know, and I mean, that kind of gives you an impression of how the collective spirit of making the record was. There was no great argument about it.
The way the lyrics go isn't the way that Mutt Lange wanted them. The first off, when Brian, that was the first vocal take that Brian did on Back in Black. Mutt Lange wanted it to go, she was a fast machine, da-da-da. She kept her motor clean. He wanted it pulled apart And he played it back to Malcolm and he went, nah, what the fuck's that? I don't know. Go back the other way, it rocks.
I've seen interviews with Angus and Malcolm, and Angus was saying there was a little country riff that they had, and they brought it into the song. They've sort of built this song around that. During the chorus, you shook me on, that little thing that they do in there, that's very country, mate.
The riff goes from the main key to the dominant key. And the dominant key is when you hear a dominant key in a piece of music, it's like the end of a hymn or a piece of music where you're waiting for it to return to the last chord. That's the best way I can describe it. In 12-bar blues, it's the last key they get to before they go back to the beginning. And you know they're going to go back to the beginning. And that's possibly part of the commercial aspect of the riff.
Again, the chorus is very big. It's lots of harmonies going on. I wouldn't like to think how many vocals are actually on that. But when you listen to them do it live, it's a stripped down version, but there's a lot more voices in the actual final mix down of that.
When massive success came to them, it wasn't just a quick flash in the pan. It was built kind of slowly. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, by the time they released Fly on the Wall, which I think is perhaps the worst album AC/DC ever released, they were probably at their biggest commercially. Much, much bigger than they were when they released Back in Black. And yet Back in Black is by far and away, a better album, and as everybody knows, a much, much bigger selling album.
You Shook Me All Night Long was actually released as a single twice. Firstly from Back in Black, and then 5 years later from the Who Made Who compilation album.
It was certainly a track that they would do more of in the future. It's something that kind of led them to see that they could do that kind of material, whereas before they were a bit limited in the kind of stuff they could put together.
When we'd finished mixing the album in New York, because of the schedule that everybody had and because we were a little bit behind the schedule, it fell to Mutt and I to take the album and in those days you kind of delivered the album to the record label. And all these guys came in, all of the marketing people from all the various territories around the States, and they all sat around in this room. And we played them the album from top to bottom. But the thing that always sits in my memory is that all these guys kind of sat around and the main marketing guy said, well, started discussing what would be best in different territories. And of course he said, well, You Shook Me All Night Long, it seems to me a good lead-off single, that would be great in the Midwest and so on. And you got all these guys going, well, I'm not sure we'll get that onto radio and things like that. So it's very much, it always put into perspective to me sometimes how wrong these people can be, because that's arguably one of the best rock hit singles that ever hit the American charts.
Have a Drink on Me was question marked as being potentially tasteless, given the circumstances surrounding Bon Scott's death, but evidently, was another tribute to Bon, a man who liked to drink, but Bon liked to drink and Bon liked to take drugs, but did so in moderation.
I don't think any of them actually sat there and thought, oh, that's a bit close to the mark, because Bon wasn't that kind of person. He wasn't someone that would be offended by that kind of thing.
I feel that a lot of assumptions were made about Have a Drink on Me, the assumptions about Bon and his role in inspiring the lyrics, but I think the reality is very different, and I don't think Bon Scott had any real part to play in that particular song.
But according to Brian, it wasn't like that at all. It was more the way that he met the boys in the band and kind of got to know them well. His whole mentality being from Newcastle, where people are big drinkers and kind of friendly and get to know each other through a drink, you kind of say, have a drink on me.
So in a way, it's AC/DC paying tribute to what they were about and their position in rock and roll, because, hey, this is what we do.
The lyrics, whiskey, gin and brandy with a glass and pretty handy,
Trying to walk a straight line on sour mash and cheap wine. They are genius. That is absolute genius. To get the lyrical role to it, but include all those drinks in it. I mean, you've got to sit down and be sober to do that. It's almost a tip of the hat from Brian to Bon, but whether Bon had any input into that song, there's only a handful of select people that know.
The essence of the lyrics were brought about by Brian, obviously, and Angus and Malcolm, and then everybody else fed in when there were maybe lines missing. But the way the lyric in the song went was the perception of the guys whose songs they are. And if I was to give an opinion of whether the lyric was one thing or another, it would be my opinion, just the same as anybody else has an opinion on that particular song.
I think there's too much trying to read into the lyrics from certain songs on Back in Black, a Bon Scott connotation. I actually think it's a combination of AC/DC saying to everybody, our music's about having a good time, so go and have a drink with us.
Have a Drink on Me is based on a very simple blues riff, but with Mutt Lange's musical input, the song is given a more refined sound.
This is an emotive song. It's one of the ones that Brian really, I think, feels at home with. Everybody likes a drink. I think he feels slightly more at home with this song. And he starts off, again, he doesn't blow his cookies in this one. It comes in very powerfully.
But I think it's part of Bon's role in AC/DC that everyone wanted to relate every song on Back in Black to him and to his reputation and to his legacy. And I think that pays tribute to Bon, but is unfair on AC/DC.
On an album like Back in Black, if you put that track on any other album, people would be saying, oh, fantastic. It's not lost because it's on Back in Black, but it's not the classic would have been on another album.
There was a certain audience nature to what was going on. We were the audience for Brian, albeit a small audience, while he was performing those songs. And I think that encouraged him to perform. So it was quite natural that some of the most extraordinary performances that he gave on some of those songs, the only comment you could make when he finished that performance was to push the talk back and clap, because it said everything.
Brian Johnson delivered on Back in Black one of the greatest rock and roll debuts of the 20th century.
It's an absolute tour de force. I don't think he was ever better before or after. This was when he really rose to his moment.
All musicians perform best if you can create an environment that they feel most comfortable in. And Brian was certainly no exception in that, and my approach to recording any musician is always the same, is just to try and make people feel as comfortable and as natural as they possibly can.
You know, some people might have cracked under that pressure. I think it's a measure of the character of Brian Johnson, that he managed to adapt to that situation.
As far as what I think of his vocal performance on Back in Black, it's absolutely stellar. It's enormous. The sound that Mutt Lange got, he got a really good sound. He positioned the vocals well within the mix. They weren't domineering, but they weren't too far back. And he's never been able to better that. And as he says, there are some songs where there are some notes that even dogs can't hear them.
There seems little point in comparing the performance of Brian to Bon Scott, when both singers have such a different approach to their craft.
Brian came into a completely different set of circumstances from the ones that Bon faced. Obviously, from Brian's perspective, it was kind of a scary moment. But the guy's an amazing singer, and really, it was really down to making sure that Brian was comfortable and he could then get on with doing what he did best, and he did that in bucket loads.
If Brian had tried to emulate Bon from the off, he wouldn't have even got the gig with a band, because when I was talking about going back to Alan Fryer, the reason he didn't get the job was that he was too much like Bon. He was Australian, he had that inflection in his voice, and also he had good bonhomie, he liked to drink, and the band thought, what if this happens again?
There are two controversies that hang over Back in Black. Did Bon record material for the album? And did he contribute any of the lyrics?
There is no demo with Bon Scott. He never demoed anything with the band for Back in Black. Sorry, all those people out there who believe in the Loch Ness Monster, this is where it's debunked. It doesn't exist. I know people claim they've heard cassettes, they've heard MP3s on the net. They're not Bon. The lyrical issue with Bon Scott is a little bit more muddied and slightly more controversial. The fact is, Bon did write one or two lines for the Back in Black album. I know, I saw them. I saw he'd written them down. She told me to come, but I was already there. From You Shook Me All Night Long is a Bon Scott line. Definitely, no question about it. Ian Jeffries, AC/DC's tour manager, claims to have sheafs of papers of lyrics Bon had written for Back in Black, and that some of those lyrics turned up in songs. Now, how much he actually contributed is a moot point. My feeling is no more than a couple of lines were ever used, that the vast majority of the lyrics came from Brian Johnson and also maybe from Angus and Malcolm Young.
He's rehearsing with them, the next thing he's recording an album with them, but not only that, he's actually replacing one of the best loved singers in rock and roll in the band, and he dealt with it all.
And for him it must have been a very strange feeling, because he was replacing an icon. He was stepping into the shoes of someone who'd become a legend, someone who was a character, very popular, one of the great frontmen of all time.
And he was worried about the kind of reaction to him being the new singer. But as far as actually whether he could do the job, whether he was capable of leading that kind of band, that was never in question.
Not only that, someone who had a very distinctive way of writing lyrics, and he suddenly, you're in AC/DC, congratulations, we're going in the studio in a couple of weeks to start recording an album. So get writing those lyrics and get weaving in the studio.
I think it's kind of probably stretching the boundaries to think he might have been unhappy there, because although he said he didn't like the relaxed kind of pace of life, in a sense it actually suited him down to the ground to be like that, because that way there was less pressure, which is one of the reasons why they were there in the first place.
Although the pressure on Brian must have been enormous, it's easy to overlook how the rest of the band must have been feeling.
One of their bandmates was dead. 2 months later, they're in a studio with this guy they hardly knew, doing an album. And they must have wondered at certain points, are we doing the right thing? Maybe we should have waited.
You might perhaps think that the band had to adapt to Brian, but I don't believe they did. The AC/DC ethic is to get a good riff, put it together, pan it out, 2 guitars, put the bass and drums behind it. So I still believe that Brian was working to the band, and it worked. It worked, as did Bon Scott. But the AC/DC style didn't change. It's a kind of hammer-it-out belter of a voice, especially on Back in Black. But it's the kind of voice that has to be used at full pelt, if you know what I mean.
It hasn't been easy plain sailing for him all the way through being an AC/DC. It's not, the Youngs aren't the easiest people to to deal with at times, and there's always been rumours that, Brian's out of the band and getting someone else in, always denied. Brian tells you that they're not true, but, to have that kind of speculation going on about what you do in your career can't be that easy, and he's dealt with all that in very much the same matter-of-fact way that he dealt with joining the band.
It's a bit like going into an acting role, and they're saying, well, we don't want your lovey side, we want you just to be tough and mean. And AC/DC just said, there's no ballads in this band. You got to get in there and give it 100%. And there is the story that Brian tells himself about the first track being that he actually vocally recorded was "You Shook Me All Night Long," and he sort of said, "What do you want me to do, lads?" And Malcolm said, "Go in there and give it some." And he did. He went in there, came back out, and they played it back, and he said, "Jesus, it sounds like someone's dying in there," and it was him.
Shake a Leg, I think, the most underrated song on Back in Black. I think it's the best riff on the album. I think it's the best vocal performance on the album. I think it's one hell of a beast of a rock and roll song.
What on earth are they talking about? Shake a leg, to most people, it's when you're going for a piss in the pub and you're trying to get the last bit in because it doesn't trickle down your leg. And I think actually that may be closer to the truth than anything else.
Shake a Leg almost verges into heavy metal and is certainly the heaviest track on the album. This was a great way of showing what they were capable of when they put their minds to it.
Come on!
Brian's vocal performance on the track was so remarkable that the song was immediately considered too dangerous for Brian to perform live, and he's only done so on a couple of occasions.
It's the only song on the album where Mutt Lange let them loose to just do what they wanted to do. And I have a feeling it's the freeform song, the song that was born almost out of a jam.
Their songs are built around riffs. You know, primarily that's what they're about. And this, you know, when they lock into a groove like they do on Shake a Leg, they just sort of like knock everyone else out for six. You know, if you think about what else was around at that time, there was nothing like it. You know, it was a kind of brute power.
That's totally different from all the other songs on the album because of the way they play the riff. The riff that they play throughout the song is played on the E string. It was like that they had this riff and it's all done on one string and it's a run down, or well actually it's a run up. I can't think of another song that they did where they did that.
The vocal performance from Brian sends shivers down your spine. You know, that married with this just super powerful riff, the kind of riff, that sort of thing that Metallica would be coming up with on their Black album, sort of, you know, like 10, 11 years down the line.
Because of its tempo and high-reaching notes, Shake a Leg was by far the toughest song on the album for Brian to perform.
You could see the veins standing out on the side of his head when he sung that one, that's for sure.
That is the most difficult song to sing, and I've sung it, and it is almost impossible to sing live.
Most of the vocal performances, we spent the best part of the day working on each one, but a lot of that was because you can't expect anybody to sing at that level with that amount of power consistently all day. So we'd have to take breaks, we'd have to go off and do something else, you know, we'd stop and do a bit of, you know, solo guitar or something like that, or do some backing vocals.
It's a hell of a vocal because it starts off, again, it starts off quite high anyway. It really does set the scene, and when Brian moves up, he moves through the gears pretty rapidly, and it's got a double-edged chorus where he says shake a leg. The next line, shake your head, is even higher than shake a leg. Shake a leg, shake your head, and it's really high. I couldn't do it without standing up and squeezing my nuts. It's fantastic.
Because you know, one of the points about recording those vocals was that Mutt and I expected him to put 110% into every single line on that album. And he put 120, 140% into every line on that album, which is why it's so absolutely remarkable.
What the good thing about that, where it sits, I think, on the album, because you Have a Drink on Me, and it goes Shake a Leg, and then it's just before the end of the album, and it sits nicely because you're sort of almost blown out. You sort of listen to that, and it's, oh, geez.
It's been traditional for AC/DC to finish their albums with a slow, bluesy number. Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution was the one song that hadn't been written before the band reached the studio.
Originally, the band were quite happy to go with 9 tracks, but the record company and Mutt Lange really wanted 10 to round things up.
And in fact, what happened was we all went off, we took an evening off and went out for dinner, while Malcolm got on with putting it together with the studio assistant, Benjamin Armbrister, huge, great Bahamian guy who sat in on drums. And when we came back from dinner, that's what they got. And it was just, everybody went, yeah, this is fantastic, this is perfect.
Any blues guitarist would immediately recognise the song as simple 12-bar blue.
12 bars, the structure of a general rock and roll number, and it runs through 12 bars, and you run through three chord changes, and you get back to the beginning.
And it's great that they did that and they put that on the album, because to me it shows that that's what sort of musicians they are. They are that, you know, that's their root, if you want to call it. You know, that's where they came from.
The song is allegedly inspired by the Marquee Club in London, which was facing charges of noise pollution from its local council.
It's obvious what the song's about to them. You know, they know people don't like what they do, but to them, that's what it's all about.
So rock and roll ain't noise pollution. You've got to play rock and roll louder. What's the point? If you're not getting up people's noses, there's no point. You know, rock and roll is meant to be played loud, from Elvis Presley to AC/DC.
AC/DC had courted controversy before on Highway to Hell by recording the track Night Prowler. The song was allegedly written about the serial killer Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Prowler, who, when finally caught, was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt. Bon always maintained otherwise, but the band were always to be plagued by the incident.
You know, they were then responsible for all sorts of serial killings and slayings, and they'd not really helped their cause by appearing on the front cover with Bon wearing a pentagram and Angus with his devil horns. Once they'd seen the reaction to it, they just thought, oh, this is ridiculous, and just kind of washed their hands of it. And ending the Back in Black album with Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution was just kind of really drawing a line to the end of that whole thing.
The beginning of the song has a sort of free-form flow to it, and almost Brown just mumbling.
Hey there, all you middlemen! Throw away your fancy clothes!
Why they left it in? I wonder sometimes if it were a mistake and it shouldn't have been there at all. However, such is Mutt Lange's meticulous attention to detail, I can't believe that to be the truth.
I bunged it into record, as I always do, right at the very, very beginning. And that's what he said. And we just went, oh, that's got to stay in.
It's almost like a man, I'm caught like a rabbit in the headlights. What do I do? And basically that's what he said. He said to Matt, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to sound in this? And Matt said, I just fuck about. Around that time there's a lot of evangelists on television, and you know, we will cover all your sins if you give us enough money, and that kind of crap. And Malcolm said, just give us some of that preaching bullshit.
And the way they play that song, you know, with Angus playing it open and Malcolm playing up high on the 12th fret, you know, they mix the two guitars together. And when they go into the chorus, they both go into it at the same, with the same way of playing. That lifts it up into this, you know, lifts it up to the big chorus.
Yeah, I was saying earlier about Brian being able to put his cheeky stamp on it the way that, say, Bon would have done, and this line is testament. I took a look inside your bedroom door. You look so good lying on your bed. Great scene to be set. There he is. He walks in. He's primed. There's this woman, curvature. Remember? She's lying on the bed. He says, I asked you if you wanted any rhythm in you. She said, you said, I want to rock and roll instead. He's been given a red card. Nah, I'd rather not. I'd rather listen to the music, mate. What a double, you know, I'm the rock and roll star. Nah, fuck off. I'd rather listen to this.
AC/DC were not played very much on the radio in the UK, but Noise Pollution was to become their biggest hit from the album.
This was the first time that they'd found themselves in the top 20 in the UK, and it kind of indication. It's where they would stay as a band who would release singles, a couple of singles off of their albums. They would stay there for quite some time over the years with future singles from future albums.
To me, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution was a celebration of 25 years of rock and roll. 25 years of one of the heroes, Chuck Berry. And Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, Rock and Roll Ain't Gonna Die, on the one hand was basically saying to people, this isn't about noise, and it wouldn't survive this long if it had been about noise. It's actually about great songs and great performances, and has defined the last quarter of a century of all our lives. But even if you think that, if come this far, it's not going to die, it's going to stay going.
It's got the right feel, it's just dirty, it's a little bit bluesy.
Yeah, there's no huge big ending on at the end of the album, it's just a nice classic AC/DC moment again. Just a little bang, and that's it.
Before you know it, it's gone. And however long that album lasts, it still catches me out almost, the way that Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution ends, because it's just like almost them sneaking out the back door and going dunk, and they're gone. They left the party, there's women laying over there and there's booze laying over there, but they've left the party, but they closed the door on the way out. They're nice lads.
It's just a rock and roll, yeah.
On July the 31st, 1980, Back in Black was released to a hungry audience of die-hard fans still mourning the loss of their singer and an expectant music press, keen to see how that bloke from Geordie was going to cut it.
Metal was still in a regenerative process. The new wave of British heavy metal had reignited interest in rock music in the UK, and then of course the influence sort of spread worldwide. And AC/DC were perfectly poised to sort of be towards the top of the tree as the whole rock movement gathered apace.
The enormous marketing machine that accompanies album launches these days was simply not around in the early 1980s, particularly in the emerging rock and metal scene.
They were taking some adverts in the music press. I mean, I doubt whether Atlantic Records would have even bothered trying advertising outside of the music press. When Back in Black came out, Kerrang! And Metal Hammer didn't exist. It only really had Sounds, Enemy, Melody Maker and Record Mirror. So, you know, the metal community would have known about Back in Black, but it's obviously, just by how many copies it sold over the years, it's sold to way beyond that community because it's a great record.
The press reaction to the release was very encouraging, and the album surprised everyone by topping the UK charts. But for some, the introduction of Brian raised concerns about AC/DC's future direction.
A lot of people felt he changed the band too much and took them in a direction that wasn't suitable, certainly against what they were used to hearing from AC/DC.
You know, it was a big success when it came out, but you've got to put it into context. It wasn't a huge album in the same way that Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, or Hysteria by Def Leppard, or the Black Album by Metallica, or Nevermind by Nirvana.
But for the AC/DC fans, aware of the hostile reaction Brian was getting in the press, support was always sincere, particularly during the band's first live gigs promoting the album.
And as soon as they saw them live, they knew that this was the right guy for the band. He managed to sing his own material perfectly and just recreate it as it was on the album. But he also managed to sing difficult songs in the circumstances. He had to put across to a lot of Bond fans Bond songs without trying to do it in a way that tried to say, you know, I've replaced him.
You can market and game plan an album to sell about 5 million worldwide on a very clever strategy. After that, momentum takes over.
No one in their wildest dreams could ever imagine the album would go on to become the juggernaut it became. It continued to sell steadily for over 25 years, and now tops an astounding 42 million copies sold. The second biggest studio album ever, behind Michael Jackson's Thriller.
AC/DC hit exactly at the right time. They hit the spot perfectly. Why? Combination of great songs, great performances, great momentum, the great loss of Bon Scott, and the fact there were an awful lot of people who identified with trying to cheer the band on because they really wanted it to succeed. But beyond all that, the X Factor took over.
The record company weren't directly involved in the day-to-day making of the record. We're talking about an era when record companies were supportive of artists like AC/DC. And all the key people at Atlantic Records knew that this was a fantastic band, and they knew that the space had to be left for them to get on with it.
The quick fire hit will not guarantee you long-lasting sales, but delivering an absolute corker of an album from start to finish, that's, you know, the ultimate package, people are constantly going to go out and buy it over and over and over again.
They waited until we finished the album, and then the band had a great influence on how that album was, how it was packaged, how it was marketed, how it was presented, and all the rest of the stuff. And the marketing people took that and took it forward and worked with the product, if you like, to use their terminology.
It was the right album at the right time with the right sound. It had a modern sound for 1980, but a retro feel. It had songs that people could relate to, but aspire towards. It had performances that people felt were simple, but also were very complicated, because AC/DC songs may be simple to play, so why is it no one does it as well as AC/DC? I think everything came together at the right time, and the era was right. Everybody was waiting for a hard rock band who could take the world.
I think the album went on to be a massive success because it was an incredibly honestly made album with great songs by a band that could back up. You know, they were writing checks they could fill all the way down the line. They have the greatest respect for their audience, for their fans. And that comes across in the records they make, it comes across in the gigs that they do.
It meant a lot. It still means a lot because I was a young rock fan when it came out. AC/DC were and still are my favourite band. You know, I went through the trauma of being a fan of a band who just lost their lead singer. Obviously nothing to the trauma that the band themselves went through, but it's still quite a traumatic thing when you were that young and that into a band. You know, I mean, the fact that I can remember to this day every detail of putting the needle on the record and hearing Hell's Bells for the first time and hearing Brian sing for the first time, you know, that will be with me. You know, I couldn't probably tell you that in context with any other AC/DC album, but Back in Black sticks so firmly in the memory because of what was happening at the time that, you know, it came out.
It is astonishing that here we are more than 30 years after AC/DC first started, and they're still one of the most celebrated and important and influential bands of all time. I don't feel they've made a great album since Back in Black. They've made good albums for those about to rock, Stiff Upper Lip more recently, maybe Flicker the Switch, but they made a lot of mediocre albums. Interestingly enough, across the years, AC/DC have become so well loved. They're so much still the people's band that they get away with all of that.
Back in Black, when you're younger, you don't necessarily realise what the whole story was with it, but there's kind of an attitude and there's something buzzing off the vinyl that you get that just feels different. And it was one of those albums that really piqued my interest in the band. It was the first I heard. Obviously you go back and it's a different era with Bon, and that's great for what it is. But Back in Black was really the kind of beginning.
It's true. You can look. There's two AC/DCs, isn't there? There's Bon and there's Brian, and I would never take anything away from Brian. I think he's terrific. The record that Back in Black became may have been the absolute swan song that AC/DC did, you know, with Bon Scott had he lived. You know, I've sort of had a bit of a theory that, you know, had Bon lived and gone ahead and done that, this is all hypothetical, of course, that he might have even left the band.
But for a man to come in under those circumstances and produce a vocal performance that he has never bettered, and even if he could go back to those days, would never better now, even with hindsight, he stopped AC/DC from becoming a name of where are they now.
The great bands for me are bands that evolve a sound and a style that reflects their influences. And, you know, AC/DC are no different from the Stones or any of those other really great bands who had their influences. They went back to these influences. They've got influences that go right back into musical tradition.
It's the one where they kind of reached a new plateau, which they could never hope to do again. And because of that, it still sells, it's still reissued. People know that it comes out now, reissued, remastered. It sounds even better than it did then. And it's just like a new album again to some people. You can put the headphones on and hear new things every time you listen to it.
I want to say it's when their balls dropped. It's when the band they finished up being kids and they started into men. You know, it's literally, you could see they changed from being like rock and rollers to being proper rockers. If that's a way, but like, to put it in a nutshell, it's a rebirth of AC/DC.
I think it's important to sort of make the contrast with some of the bands that have imitated AC/DC, and there's bands now that are kind of going back only that far, and imitating bands from that particular era. They haven't taken the time to go back another stage or two and really get to the roots of where that music comes from and turn it into something that's new.
I think it's a fitting tribute to Bon Scott. I think it's a perfect introductory vehicle for Brian Johnson. You know, there's a touch of sorrow that AC/DC have never managed to hit those creative heights again. You know, but you know, I acknowledge that they're still my favourite band. But I know they'll never make another album as good as Back in Black. It's just got everything.
They make these albums, and yeah, okay, they're commercially successful albums, more because they've got a great deal of backup to them to make them commercially successful. But they disappear without trace after a couple of years. And yet, here we are, still talking about an album that we made years ago. How many years is it? And people are still interested in why it was successful. And there's no formula. It's just honesty. It's just being good at what you do.
Made in 1980. It doesn't have a sell-by date because every time you take it out the tin, it's as fresh as the day that it was made. You don't have to remaster that. You can't remaster that. I've never known another album like it for the sonic. It's the sonic majesty that is Back in Black. It's fantastic.